Okay, everybody, hello, my name's Sean Kay. I'm the program leader for Foundation Art and Design at the British Higher School of Art and Design in Moscow. And it's my great pleasure to welcome you all to the very first International Network of Foundation Educators Symposium, which the British Higher School of Art and Design is very proud to be hosting. We're pleased to have contributions from artists and educators internationally and from a wide range of different foundation programs. And I think that we're going to have a very stimulating few hours of short talks about different aspects of foundation. Establishing a professional association for foundation art and design was first discussed quite a few years ago by, among others, those who've become the current steering group for the International Network of Foundation Educators. And it's been quite a long process in terms of staging and running this event. And in talking about that, I'd sort of like to acknowledge some of the forerunners and precedents for what we're trying to establish with INFI. For many years, Paul Stafford ran an annual foundation conference titled FAB, or Foundation and Beyond, at Kingston University, and then later on at the University of the Creative Arts. And I think that acted as quite an important yearly forum and ran to around 2014, 2015. So that was a sort of quite an important precedent for what we're trying to do here. And then in 2013, Chloe Briggs, who's chair of foundation at Paris College of Art, organised a two-part conference, first at Tate Britain and then at Paris College of Art, that was called A History Uncovered, A Future Imagined. And that led to this publication. I'm not sure whether you can see that. It's called 72 Assignments, the Foundation Course in Art and Design Today. And it draws together a collection of foundation briefs and assignments from an international field of artists and educators. And that publication itself was quite important in forming our ideas to make the organisation international and not just UK based. But to briefly go back to the UK, what we now know as foundation in the UK was initially developed in the late 1950s by Harry Thubron and Tom Hudson at Leeds College of Art, and by Victor Passmore and Richard Hamilton at Newcastle University. However, to return to the international, those courses very much have their roots in the Bauhaus in Germany, and also in Vykutemas, a short-lived but radical art school that was established in Moscow in 1920 that had very strong connections with Bauhaus. They existed at the same time. In fact, the exhibitions program Blip Blip Blip, which I'm partly responsible for programming, staged an exhibition in November 2020 to coincide with the centenary of Vykutemas, and it was called Foundations, 100 Years After Vykutemas. And the exhibition speculates that one of the legacies of this short-lived art school is the continued existence of foundation courses today, both in the UK and in a great many other places in the world as well. Then in 2017, Joe Woodhouse, head of foundation at the University of Sunderland, ran a great conference at the Baltic in Gateshead, which was called Foundations of a Creative Curriculum. And following that conference, there were a number of discussions regarding the possibility of establishing a professional association for foundation education. And then in September 2019, Paris College of Art hosted a pilot event with a range of foundation educators who have then become part of these conversations. And at that event, the idea for an international network of foundation educators emerged. And I'll talk a little bit more at the end of this event about our plans for this organisation. However, I want to talk a little bit now about the structure of today's event. So we've got 12 great talks that have been organised into 4 strands. So each of the speakers is going to present a Pecha Kucha presentation. I'm sure most of you are familiar with that format, but for those who are not, a Pecha Kucha presentation is 20 slides timed for 20 seconds each. So each talk is 6 minutes 40 seconds. The presentations, as I said, have been arranged into 3 strands, and each of those strands is going to be chaired by a member of the INFI steering group. So the first strand is Foundation Now, which will be chaired by Joan Beadle. The second is Foundation Projects, would be chaired by Chloe Briggs. And the final strand is Foundation Pedagogy, which will be chaired by Joe Woodhouse. So they'll introduce the theme of the strand, and they'll introduce each individual speaker. And at the end of the 4 presentations within that particular strand, there will be 10 to 15 minutes of questions. And there's a Q&A button in the bottom panel in Zoom, so that you can type questions into that, and they will, the chair of that panel will then ask that question to the rest of the speakers in the panel. If your question is for a specific panel member, please can you make that clear in the Q&A when you type your questions in. And then at the end of each strand, there will be a short 5 to 10 minute break, so that you can go off and make a cup of tea or a cup of coffee, or use the loo if you need to. Ali is going to put the schedule up in the chat, so you should be able to see that. In fact, I can just see that it's gone up in the chat now, so you can see what the timing is. So that just leads me to introduce the chairs of the 3 strands who make up the INVI steering group. So Joan Beadle, as I said, will chair the Strand Foundation Now. Joan is the Fashion and Textiles Pathway Leader on the foundation course at Manchester School of Art, where she's worked for over 30 years and where she had a period of being the programme leader as well. Her early professional experience of working with artist collectives and cooperatives throughout the 80s and 90s have made collaborative working an important part of her practice. She's coordinated an international exchange between the Zhengzhou Academy of Fine Arts in China and Manchester School of Art, exploring comparative pedagogies within a cross-cultural teaching and learning. She recently coordinated the online collaborative project, the Big Studio Dynamic Draping, between Manchester School of Art and the British Higher School of Art and Design in Moscow, utilising fabrics donated by Alexander McQueen. Joan is actively involved in exploring and documenting educational practices within art school education, and she recently curated the exhibition, The Exploded Studio, as part of the 21st Annual GLAD Conference. Chloe Briggs will chair the Strand Foundation projects. Chloe is the chair of foundation at Paris College of Art. She has a particular interest in drawing and is incredibly proactive in this area. In 2013, she created the organisation Drawing is Free, which offers people of all ages and backgrounds opportunities to draw together. Between 2014 and 2018, she coordinated a series of collaborative projects with foundation students from Paris College of Art and Central St. Martin's, which was sponsored by Eurostar. She regularly contributes to and organises conferences about art education, most recently the Teaching Drawing Symposium, organised by Drawing Projects UK and Drawing is Free in association with the Trinity Boy Drawing Prize. And in 2013, she researched, collated, edited the publication 72 Assignments, the Foundation Course in Art and Design Today, which, as I said before, was a major collection of foundation projects from international art and design educators. And Joe Woodhouse will chair the final strand, Foundation Pedagogies. Joe's the programme leader for Foundation Art and Design at the University of Sunderland, where he also coordinates an annual drawing week for the School of Arts and Creative Industries. He's explored the idea of reinterpreting and reevaluating design histories and pedagogical experiments by pioneering artists and educators, often working collaboratively with other artists, designers and students. He was responsible for organising conferences such as Foundations of the Creative Curriculum at the Baltic and Gateshead, and along with a small team of staff who also teach on the foundation programme at Sunderland, Joe established the innovative collaborative art group Foundation Press. Foundation Press make projects experimenting with publishing, printing and collaboration they explore an art practice built around site-specific briefs or questions using the idea of a printing press loosely, thinking about a press as a space where different conversations and voices can be heard and published. I'm going to hand over to Joan now to introduce the first strand, Foundation Now.
Thanks, Sean. I'm going to make a start on introducing this first strand and our first 4 speakers. Foundation Now, in a personal sense, it makes me reflect on kind of the idea of now and then and time in relation to Foundation, but also my own history on Foundation, which it's always a sort of brings about a sense of amusement to me that when I first started teaching on Foundation, which was 37 years ago, there were lots of questions about whether it would last or whether it had a future. And so kind of 37 years on, I feel that we have, it's a sense of amusement to have survived, and we're still here and we're still going strong. So it's my job to welcome you to the first strand of this afternoon's presentation, which has the title Foundation Now. And Foundation Now prompts a reflection on the current, and I suppose unavoidably this will and should include our responses and reactions to the situation of the pandemic and how we collectively have developed strategies to respond to this and to survive. And pertinent to thinking about Foundation Now and time and changes and adaptations that we've all made this year and the discoveries that we've all unearthed along the way. I visited the Goldsmiths Fine Art Shows in London, which are around the corner from me the other day, and picked up a catalogue which has a preface written by one of the staff at Goldsmiths, who is the writer and critic Michael Archer, in which he refers to a work by Ian Hamilton Finlay, which is a series of carved stones. And in describing this, I'm aware it's a little bit like describing perfume on the radio, but bear with me. So he's referring to this work by Ian Hamilton Finlay, which is a series of carved stones, which in turn refer to a quote by Louis Antoine Saint-Just, who was a central figure in the French Revolution. And the quote is, "The present order is the disorder of the future." So that is, the present order is the disorder of the future. And I just feel this is such a fitting phrase to apply to Foundation, and certainly a fitting phrase to apply to the experience of the last 2 years, and also to any consideration of the now in relation to Foundation. Because the idea of the now is always in flux in relation to Foundation. It has such a rapid pace and dynamic energy, which both locate us in the present, but also propel us dynamically towards the future. So in our 4 presentations in this section, we're going to hear about an interpretation of the now in terms of the strategies, the initiatives and values that are all part of an international audit of Foundation Now. I'd like to welcome our presenters and thank them for contributing to this opportunity, to this collective taking stock to articulate, evaluate and ultimately celebrate where we are and what we are in Foundation Now. And so to begin, I'm going to introduce our first presenter and our first speaker, who is Fatima Touga. Fatima is Associate Professor of Artificial Intelligence in the Arts, Art and Global Equity at the University of Florida in the United States. Fatima is an interdisciplinary artist who uses dialogue and discovery among disciplines and cultures as central approaches of art making, interrogating the impact of technologies. Her body of work has also been integrated into academic curricula in multiple disciplines and discussions, including cultural studies, feminism, diaspora, globalization, anthropology, social and environmental justice, to name just a few. And Fatima has been involved in Foundation curriculum work at multiple institutions since 2003.
I guess I should get going. A moving methodology. Foundation programs and the rest of art and design must now pivot to what is meaningful and relevant to students' lives. The world is still in trauma because of the pandemic. We are at a tipping point. We can no longer take our planet's resilience of climate, ice caps, biomes, hydro bloodstreams, and biodiversity for granted. Hopefully these conditions have been unmasked. Hopefully these conditions have been unmasked. The chronic inequities under the surface are there for all to see. Global health and wealth gaps are more visible, along with surveillance capitalism of rogue and divisive algorithms. The narcissistic navel gazing of politicians has created a vacuum in service. For me, a vacuum in service is synonymous with a vacuum in leadership. The super wealthy are lauded as heroic philanthropists for aiding in the problems they created in the first place. Our teaching approach has to be interdisciplinary, focusing on humane methodologies. We must recognize the social and personal implications of equity in cultural practices. The teaching of skills and crafts must intersect with care and empathy, framed with contextual awareness. This call for awareness is not to be confused with being overly sentimental. Interdisciplinary teaching and learning are more relevant than ever because they present multiple approaches to materials, processes, critical and cognitive thinking. This approach empowers students to have comprehensive and inclusive learning experiences. So why adopt an interdisciplinary approach? In practical terms, we must introduce students to multiple perspectives, to challenge existing notions of dogmas, including their own, to be able to spot biases, including their own. Intersectional approaches improve criticality and increase tolerance to ambiguity. In single discipline learning approach, skepticism may be seen as a deficiency. Students come from diverse backgrounds, interests, experiences, attitudes, and values. This brings multiple forms of intelligence to the learning process. Having an interdisciplinary framework enhances students' engagement and consequently their learning. Interdisciplinary teaching increases students' livelihood of contributions beyond a single discipline and can impact the future with crossover ideas and innovations. An interdisciplinary approach mirrors our multifaceted world rather than a compartmentalized one of a neatly packaged subject matter and disciplines. I have created a checklist of 7 strategies that I use against my syllables or curriculum work to make sure these ideas are embedded into the curriculum. So 1, facts and information, acquiring and understanding information, checking and testing facts, and remembering concepts and processes. 2, use and application, understanding how and when to use skills and processes learned, thinking creatively, practically, and project management skills. 3, connection and integration, ability to connect and choose ideas, skills, processes for a given task, connecting concepts, realms, lives, and people. 4, human aspect, recognizing social and personal implications of issues and creative practice, learning about oneself. 5, care and compassion, acknowledging the role of feelings, interests, and values, developing more empathy and contextual awareness of humanity, other life forms, and the environment. 6, learning to learn, obtaining insights into learning processes, becoming a better student, and self-directed learner. 7, accepting limitations, knowing when you do not know and what to do about it, knowing when to try a new approach, consider other possibilities, and when something can no longer be salvaged. I would like to offer an acknowledgement. Since I live in the United States, I respectfully acknowledge that I'm speaking to you today from the traditional home of the Osage and Ka peoples past and present. Please accept this as a gesture of respect and commitment to a better stewardship of the lands and cultures we inhabit. It is only through acknowledging wrongs that we can start to do better. Thank you.
Thank you, Fatima. There are some really interesting and very insightful provocations in your talk, and I'm sure that will have prompted some questions and some reflection in our audience. I really loved your 7 strategies and your checklist. Moving on to our next speaker, our second presenter today is Duncan Cameron. Duncan is an artist and lecturer living in Somerset, where he has been lecturing for over 25 years and currently runs the Art Foundation programme at Strode College. For 15 years, Duncan maintained a studio in Bristol Sculpture Shed and helped to establish the organisation Spike Island. Duncan's currently a PhD candidate at the University of Plymouth, where he's also a visiting lecturer in fine art. And Duncan's presentation has the title, What's Foundation Art and Design for?
Hi, thank you very much, Joan, and fantastic talk, Fatima. So yeah, I'm Duncan. I manage the Art Foundation in Somerset in Strode College. We have about 30 to 40 students each year and a team of 8 specialists. This picture here was when we were at the Eliasson show a couple of years ago, and one of the challenges of this last difficult year and a half has been the loss of visits to museums and galleries and performances. I'm sure we've all felt that. So everybody's had to be incredibly flexible and creative this year. Here are some of the team at the end of our show earlier this last week. And it's been great to have some kind of show and to find solutions, but so much has been on Zoom chunks of the year, and the students have been incredibly resilient and resourceful, as have the staff. So I'm just going to go through, what is a foundation for? And I suppose one of the key things is developing skills. I mean, in terms of what we do as foundation managers and teachers, obviously we're trying to impart new skills in part. So the students coming from A-level, this is not A-level. So we're learning new things in new areas, and many of the students are developing skills in areas they've not worked before. A lot of foundation is about taking risks and playing. This isn't work to be mounted neatly on a portfolio. It's about trying things, being out of your depth, looking at the potential for new ways of working. This is Will projecting animation in a wood. This is Annie talking about our hometown. Sorry if you're from Yeovil. I'm sure it's ironic. It's about collaboration and fun and working together and trying things quickly, responding quickly. So we work in Strode with a lot of briefs that are very short, punchy, few days, a week, quick turnaround, one-day projects. Oh, have I lost you there? Typical. What's going on there? Bear with me. I've lost my screen. Sorry. I can't see you.
It's okay, Duncan. I think you could just keep speaking because we can definitely.
Okay. I don't know where you've we'll come back. Okay, right, we'll come back.
Yeah.
I think it's because my son signed on to a trumpet lesson. The modern world. Right. So talking about play and investigation. So students playing with materials in a new way. Here they're learning to weld, taking it very seriously, I think enjoying the masks more than anything else. You saw some slides a minute ago about investigating new ways of working, which I think is really, really key. You should be out of your depth slightly, but not unhappy. You should be enjoyment, should be part of the course, but of course you should be challenged and stretched. It needs to be exciting, fast and playful. Here the students are doing a fabrication brief, working with found materials. So we talk a lot about sustainability and low impact ways of working, and responding here with some wonderful textiles intestines led by my colleague Sue and others. I hear the students here responding with quick drawing. What is drawing? Challenging students to what drawing can be. It can be much more than just a representational mark. It can be, so many things, from performance to collaboration to playing with scale. Here they are playing with charcoal in the life room. So in some levels, there's a traditional quality to the foundation, then and now. We've talked about, was touched on earlier by Joan. The foundation I experienced 20, 30 years ago, set me up. And actually, we want to offer that for our students now. So the staff are leading with the same passion that, the benefits they saw from their own foundation. Here they are on the catwalk making costumes in a 2-day project where we have to use sustainable materials to make costumes. Here we have a lion walking the catwalk in the art department on the tables. So a lot of it's about that kind of working together, that building of that community. The foundation, amongst many things, is a community of new learners with many life experiences. I see Will broke his arm, is putting up the end of your show there a couple of years ago. So working together to hang the show, to work together on projects, to collaborate and build friendships for life. And many of them are coming in with many different life experiences, some from A-level, some from college, some as adults. We've got students on the foundation that are aged from 18 to 82. And actually that's really exciting. I think developing a critical voice is part of that conversation you have with students in foundation, testing, challenging prejudice, having an opinion, and actually learning to talk about practice is really, really key in terms of their progression to whether it be university or careers. Testing your ideas, your critical thinking is very much part of what we're doing all the time. And some of that in formal settings like this, but many of those conversations are the informal, soft conversations you have around student spaces, or the students have their own desks. And those conversations you have with students consistently about testing thinking, playing with alternatives, and looking at practice and informing your work is so key to what a foundation should be, I feel. We're talking about issues and sharing ideas. This is, we're talking about Denim Day. So talking, about issues to do with sexual assault. So a lot of the conversation is about sharing your thinking, and not just about whether you can make a thing, whether it can be fabricated well, but, what do you care about? Here we had a really nice workshop with Julian Roberts, who came in and did a pattern cutting workshop. And all students are doing this. They're not streamed. They're experiencing disciplinary areas that they're just not familiar with, that are new to them, that are exciting new things to have a go at. And of course, that cross-disciplinary thinking, which is what Fatima was saying, is so much part of that foundation experience. And I come back to that again, it's not just about the making, it's why are you making things? Why are you using your voice? What do you want to say? What do you care about? And so much, at the moment, it's, Black Lives Matter, mental health, gender, sustainability, COVID, there are issues that people want to talk about within their practice. And it's about the act of communication, art as message, making, telling a story. Practically also many students are progressing, obviously, to university and such like, so they begin to work in specialist areas and begin to respond in fine art. Here you can see on the left, and on the right you can see Andy's working on theatre props. We do a link project collaborating with theatre, the Little Shop of Horrors. So students go on to all sorts of careers and professions from the foundation, and many of them into degrees. So we're helping them build portfolios on a practical level. The foundation is partly about that, building a kind of confidence in an area of particular interest, certainly as you're completing for your end of year show and progressing onwards. So that includes now building an online presence. That includes beginning to think about how to kind of push yourself out there and be seen. And I think, I suppose, to close, one of the key things, it should be fun. You should be enjoying it. If you're not enjoying yourself, you're not engaging, and you don't want to put the hours in, there are no shortcuts. So you want to be here. So here we are doing a one-day zombie workshop, body casting, kind of performative collaboration. There's so many things we do, but it should be enjoyable. Challenging but enjoyable, and you want obviously the students to keep in touch. And one of the lovely things about the current world is, with all the students blogging and building Instagram profiles, is that I keep in touch with them as they go off as creative friends into the world, and I find out what they're doing, and they come back and speak to our new cohorts year on year. So yeah, let's celebrate the foundation. What a wonderful year, what a wonderful experience, and let's keep it lively and strong going forwards.
Thank you, Duncan. Thank you for that. That was great. Just the references there to sort of thinking about the community on foundation, and how that community is a community for sharing, and also sharing thinking and sharing ideas and sharing making. Really rapido unpacking there. So our next speaker is Lucas Pangolfo. Lucas is an adjunct professor in photography at Paris College of Art, presenting the importance of learning destructive methods in art education.
Thank you, Joan, and thank you, Duncan and Fatima, for your amazing presentations. So I'm here today to present my talk, The Importance of Learning Deconstructive Methods in Art Education. So I'd like to briefly introduce myself. So I'm an artist and filmmaker who mainly deals with daily life subjects, and I'm currently teaching Introduction to Digital Media at Paris College of Art. So Introduction to Digital Media focused on preparing students for a digital artist workspace by looking at digital tools, but also contextualizing and deconstructing these tools as well through examples and different assignments. So how do we exactly teach digital tools? It's important to first establish a criteria that separates these different tools and applications by the way that they're used and applied in the real world. And of course, also showing examples of how they are used by artists today. So the foundation year, to me and just in general, is an important step towards discovering new fields in the arts. And today, creative fields are part of the workspace in ways that seemed unimaginable just decades ago. So it's important to introduce technology this early on into an artist's and a student's education. So my approach focuses on showing the theory behind these digital tools and digital art through examples, also showing different creative processes that artists have used these tools with, so that hopefully technology can become an ally to students, or hopefully the center of their practice. And the benefits of this approach can be very simple, like for example, a better insertion in the art world, as well as a work that can go deeper than just understanding the tool's technical capabilities by actually understanding why and how these tools exist. So in the first semester of Introduction to Digital Media, we mainly focus on Illustrator, Photoshop, and InDesign, which are indispensable tools to digital artists. And then students were given assignments that aim to stimulate their creativity using these tools. On the second semester, up until the half of it, we focused on video editing, then concepts of new media art and using other kinds of technology were introduced. And then unlike on the first semester here, students were free to experiment with any kind of technology or tool that they wanted to. So in both of these semesters, I took an approach of teaching formats before methods. So by that, I mean how different tools can have different meanings when they're applied, and also how choosing a frame before the work is conceptualized can actually be inspiring to artists. And this yielded mainly positive results. I was lucky to see students start with a very tiny idea that was maybe like a printed photograph, and then coming onto a fully fledged multimedia installation like we have here. And it also showed me that deconstructing these tools by showing where they came from, why they're like this, and looking at every nook and cranny can actually make the works deeper and also better connected with their fields, because here in my class, every single example was contextualized. And furthermore, it also showed me the importance of the foundation year, because this was my first year teaching in it. Because I was lucky to see students shift their interest throughout the year and also eventually choose a path that was right for the work that they wanted to create or were already creating. But one thing does need to be acknowledged, and that is that learning digital tools today is very easy. If one goes to YouTube or LinkedIn has their own platform today too, you can basically learn Photoshop or Illustrator in basically a day. So it's important for us to, as teachers, to create an environment where we're able to show different creative processes using these tools, so that students can find a process that can inspire new work for them, and eventually through experimentation find a process that fits with the work that they're doing or want to do. And in my experience, I did not have a foundation year in film school or in my master's. So through teaching these two classes, I was trying to teach what I thought my education had missed in preparing me for my career or my other years as a student as well. So I believe that the teacher, much like an artist, must act like a cartographer. So constantly mapping new areas and interactions, paying attention to new experiences and examples, and always cataloging new creative processes. And in my experience, I believe that our job as educators and teachers and instructors must not simply be teaching or showing students how to use certain tools or techniques, but to also show students how to navigate the art world and their fields through shared experiences, and of course, the failures that we've had. So in conclusion, I believe that through creating an empathic environment for their first year in education, students can find a better path to follow their work, also understand the tools that they're using meaningfully, and eventually create a work that is better connected with the surrounding world. So that was all I had for today. So thanks everyone for the opportunity and for listening to me, and I'll be happy to answer any questions later. Thank you once again.
Thank you, Lucas. That was great, and a really interesting insight into your creative approach to some technical teaching. Our final presenters in this strand are Paul Taylor and Kate Timny, who are both based at Carlisle College of Arts. Paul Taylor studied foundation at Southport College of Art in 1978 to 79 and has taught on Carlisle's foundation course since 1999, where he's been course leader in joint and solo capacity since 2010. Kate Timny is an artist and writer living in Glasgow. She lectures in fine art at Carlisle College of the Arts and is co-creator of quarterly publication Parla. And their presentation is titled Spiraling Upwards, Foundation Cycles and the Plasticity of Time.
Well, okay, right. So hope you can hear me. And my dog's just chimed in. So we'd like to tell you a story. We'll start with, as Sean mentioned earlier, post-war England. In 1953, Victor Passmore, Richard Hamilton, Harry Thubrand and others across the north of England were experimenting, delivering one-year courses following a broadly Bauhaus model of formal exploration and creative diagnosis. Into this mix, as avid sci-fi fans, came Isaac Asimov's seminal novel Foundation, about intergalactic attempts to preserve the best of civilization after the collapse of the Galactic Empire. The idea for a new utopian course to foster creative potential was born. Actually, this is a lie. I made it up. I have no idea if any of them were remotely interested in sci-fi or read Asimov. History, yawn, tells us that Foundation wasn't called Foundation until the late 1960s. But creation myths are useful for inventing futures.
Bachelard tells us that when the image is new, the world is new. We begin the first term of Foundation with the Utopia Project, where after discussion of world-building schemes from Solero's Arco Santi to Mussolini's theme park and the contradiction of a utopia for all, students work in groups to negotiate a blueprint for their ideal society. Drawing, building, arguing on systems of value and of aesthetics, threading cable cars across the studio, making wheels, waterfalls and flags. Through this process, we devise our microcosm, together digging the foundations of the structure that we'll inhabit for the year, smelling turned earth and possibility.
For those who deliver it, Foundation can sometimes feel like a karmic wheel, a groundhog year, or a jazz standard blown into new forms by each successive cohort. We introduced the course on day one by saying, this is your foundation. It will be different from all other foundations because of you, because of this combination of personalities here and now.
Our average student is around 18 when we embark on the year together. A year that at 18 feels different to a year at my 29 or Paul's 59. They have lived for 6,570 days and sign up for 365 with us.
When you teach Foundation for a long time, there's a sense of pattern of new directions emerging from the students and leading to the future. Because its essential nature is a journey from one state to another to destinations that lie beyond the bounds of this 1 year, it is always a course in flow, always that same river that you never step into twice.
This sense of newness floods the atmosphere of the Foundation studio. The students are right at the beginning of an unpredictable creative arc where we work together to define what knowledge is needed to reach a place not yet defined, not quite sure of just how much we don't know yet. I think of the word amateur, the lover, doing it not yet professionally, but out of pure fervour for it.
Time of life is a key fuel to the energy of the course. We have mature students whose lives are changed by the journey because they chose Foundation at a point where their lives needed changing. But for most, it's a process of self-actualization at the key age when you're most intensely questioning yourself and the world around you.
The brain at 18 is in massive flux. In many ways, the 18-year-old is an adult, but the parts of the brain that deal with rationality are still developing. This is a liquid time in a young person's development, where they're less risk-averse, more emotional, slightly irrational, arguably closer to the imaginative. And they say that in many ways, a teacher stays at the age of their students. Well, we'll take that. We ask the students to notice what you notice, to gather avidly in order to sharpen their awareness of the things that snag their attention, make them tick. They notate the now, fostering a sharp presence. And in actively noticing, Foundation students often describe their year in technicolor. As they document what draws their eye, they sift through the noise of new information and begin to find the things that will sustain their creativity. Often it is the case that an artist will orbit their final major project themes for the rest of their career, what Barth would call spiraling upwards around the things that ignite us.
At the beginning of Unit 2, when a first tentative choice has been made in the direction they're choosing for their creativity, we ask them to engage in a thought experiment, to run through the things that they will be going through, the potentially life-changing decisions they will make and sometimes unmake, and how they will be different artists and designers at the end of the process. Then we get them to imagine themselves on the last day of term as those people they have become, and to make a prediction of something that will have happened in the world between this date and that one, with a prize for the most surprisingly accurate prediction.
Foundation is inherently future-looking. The short length of the course makes for intensity. We're aware of passing the halfway point, aware of nearing the end. The fact that Foundation will finish soon after it started injects an energy into each project which opposes passivity. The students must act quickly, with thought always resulting in action. They must show work in the rough, hot off the press from their latest idea. They continually experiment in public.
The impact of the pandemic and lockdown has heightened the awareness of all this, and also how FAD can be both as precise as a Swiss watch and as mutable as water. The reaction when confronted by a Friday evening announcement in March last year that FMP wouldn't count towards grades demonstrated how invested the students were in the structure we had delivered to them. However, it also forced us to react in a way that was typically Foundation. We invented a new course in Imaginary Art School, the Archipelago, a chain of islands off the coast of Carlisle College, with its own curriculum devised by the students.
The image of an island chain, connected invisibly at the seabed but distant and floating on the surface, echoed our paradoxical, isolated interconnectedness. And as the lockdown unsettled our sense of place and time, the course WhatsApp group teams and daily bulletins were gradually filled with boat emojis, rocket ships, astronauts. Projects which were now immaterial could become boundless. Students made impossible artworks, propositional works which freed them to occupy the fourth plinth, send artworks to space, scale up times 5,000. The lack of physical materials foregrounded concept, and the students' work became ever more playful. The rapid acceleration towards digitization of our daily operations, contactless, Zoom, virtual exhibitions, prompted a sort of futurism, at once ambitious and tongue-in-cheek. The flexibility of normal and of time itself was undeniable, and the year gained a sense of hopeful fluidity, a moment hanging in the balance between many possible worlds.
The lessons learned by all of us were reapplied this year, becoming a model for collaborative, independent learning, creating new patterns with a new generation who have learned how to cope with catastrophe. As we said in our introduction to the resulting publication, ironically, the Archipelago ended up being an exemplification of the Foundation ethos. We may not have dealt with a global pandemic before, but there's always something. There's always only 14 hours to save the world. It's always 3-0 down at halftime in the 2005 European Cup final. There's always something that requires collective and individual creative resourcefulness, and every year the Foundation students step up. What a voyage. Asimov's original title for Foundation was The 1,000-Year Plan. So here's to the next 950 years. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Paul and Kate. That was a really revealing kind of recollection of your creative response to this year's situation. And I really love that phrase, gathering avidly. Such a nice phrase. So we've got a space now for questions and for our 4 panelists. And we've just had a kind of rapid, at-speed roller coaster ride through what might be Foundation now in all its kind of multitude of formats and on a truly international basis. So it'd be really nice if people have specific questions for our panelists, to write them into the question and answer section at the bottom, and we can read those out. I've got a couple of questions. I've got a question for Paul, actually, which is not strictly relating to your talk today, but I remember reading in the Q Arts publication a couple of years ago that you thought everybody should do Foundation, that it should be in some way obligatory as a kind of
like national service, yeah.
A kind of national arts service. I wonder if you've got anything you'd like to add to that. I thought that was a really interesting suggestion.
Well, I think, again, it relates to what we've been talking about today, in that idea of a time of life which is focused on a kind of self-discovery, which we happen to do through art and design. But you can kind of see the benefit of that for anybody, actually, that kind of reflective year to play at who you might be in the future. I think that everybody deserves a right to that on some level. And I think that's probably why we all remember Foundation so fondly. And those of us who've kind of spent our lives on that karmic wheel have a different perception of it, but everybody that you talk to has the same experience, because it does, they can kind of trace themselves back to that one year. As I say, I think everybody has a right to that. Yeah.
I guess I would really agree with that, Paul, especially because I did it twice, once in the UK and then in the US. And I have to say that maybe people need to do it not just once, but more than once.
Also, just following up that, I quite regularly speak to students and then their parents interject saying, I wish I could do it. And I go, yeah, you could. And then then they come on the course a year later. That's happened countless times.
Oh.
Yes. And when you do it for long enough, you end up teaching their grandchildren.
Yeah, well, not quite yet. The other thing I'm just going to comment on while we're waiting, if there's any questions, was the comment you made, Paul, about being mutable. I think that's really key. I think, it's familiar on one level, for the foundation I did 30 years ago, but it's also very different and it's reinvented. So it's unfamiliar and changeable every year. And it is a new foundation every year. The character of the group, the things you're responding to, the environments in which you're swimming, the weight of opinion on different areas, the kind of political, social climates, there's so many things that do change within that structure. And it's a wonderful, as you said, mutable kind of course that allows for that at its best, which keeps it new every year. It's why we're still doing it, I guess, as teachers.
Yeah. Absolutely. We have a comment in the questions from Elspeth Mackey from Leeds. Foundation Art and Design is often the first year of real learning of self and the world that students experience. Agreeing with Paul, all should do Foundation Art and Design. Yeah.
It's kind of like a kind of pot of gold on which you draw, isn't it? You remember that period and you want to be that for your students now. You want this year to be that for them. And I think that passion from the teaching team is really key, and I'm one of a great team here, and I'm sure we're all the same. And you've got to lead with passion and and energy, because it is that 1 year. People say it's so short, but that's one of its strengths because of that pace. Yeah, fantastic.
Absolutely. I have another question, which is my question actually for Fatima. I wondered about your what ambitions you have for your kind of the expansion of your interdisciplinary approach to foundation.
Well, I guess I kind of already work in that way. I do think that students need a combination, it's a little bit like what Lucas was saying, a combination of sort of an approach that deals with theory and critical thinking, and then an approach that also, I think everybody mentioned this, recognizes, both Kate and Paul mentioned this as well as Duncan, an approach that also recognizes what they're interested in, what's pressing for them and important. That has to be weighed in. And I think the environment is something important and critical. I think also, not just because I am a professor of artificial intelligence and art, but I think there's a lack of algorithmic education. People don't really understand where the algorithms come from, what is happening. They just sort of end users of technology without really being educated about what it means, to post something or to write something on social media. So I think that, to me, is becoming a critical and important aspect of what we have to address, even at the foundational level, especially because I think, I don't know what it is like in other places, but currently in the US, between climate change and not receiving likes for something you've posted, there seems to be a lot of anxiety, depression that students are dealing with. And so I think sort of unmasking it for it to not be this mystical, magical thing that you post on, and that maybe you're even being liked by a bot and not a human, it's critical to something that we have to do. And I think getting people in at the foundational level to understand that is important, because one of the reasons why I love foundations is I think it can set the tone for the kind of artist you're going to become and what's going to happen in your life in the university or college level.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's really nice to have that sense of sort of future projection for foundation in your presentation. Really, really lovely. Yeah.
Thank you, Joan.
I haven't got any other questions coming up. I don't know if anybody's got anything, any of our other panelists want to ask questions of each other. Otherwise,
Joan, I think we need to stop now so that people can have a quick break, because the next strand is going to start at 4 o'clock UK time.
Okay, we're on time. Yeah. Okay, fine.
Okay,
let's have a quick turnaround then and a quick break.
Okay,
thanks, everyone.
Thank you
So much. Thank you,
Bye.
Joan.
Thank you,
Coming from
everyone.
you, it means a lot, especially because you've been doing this longer than me.
If you want to make a quick
Wouldn't
cup
know
of
it.
tea, etc., please do it now. Chloe will introduce the next strand at 4 o'clock UK time.
Okay, welcome back everybody, or welcome to those of you who've just joined. My name is Chloe Briggs and I'm introducing the second strand of this symposium, Foundation Projects. I think when we organised this event, we decided we would lead the section that spoke to us the most, and certainly I've always been interested in the Foundation Project and or art and design photography brief. And I'm interested in its having great potential, the potential to spark creativity way beyond the confines of the institution or traditional teaching space. And I believe that the best projects defy time too. They do not date or age. Some years ago, I spoke at a teaching conference in the Netherlands about my project, Instructions for a Drawing Class. I tried to convince the audience of the different, I thought, innovative ways I was thinking about and designing the art school project. A participant in the conference argued that the project should be as dull and bland as possible, so as best to activate the creativity of the student, undermining, which was tough at the time, any ideas I had about the importance of this pedagogical tool. So my response now is I believe that a great project has all of our teaching in it, all that we know right now. We learn by inventing it and we learn by working with the students through it. I think you'll all identify with this, but a room full of students listening to the instructions of a project are a litmus test for if there is any fire in it. When their eyes light up as a teacher, you know you have it. I found that particularly poignant working with my students online this year, as our faces are so close on the screen, and I can see their eyes light up when they're excited about the project. You know that it speaks to them, that they can see themselves in it, and that the imaginations are starting to move. So the 4 speakers in this strand all explore aspects of what a project can do, from how through eloquent parameters, rules, constraints, limitations, creativity thrives. Amy Titmarsh has been learning as a student at the same time as teaching, living this actually as a reality. James Thompson will show us how collaboration is key to realizing an ambitious foundation project, one whose outcomes are so strong that the work holds its own in a professional setting or professional sphere. Doug Bowen will speak of connection, that the project parameters can embrace participants in different places, cultures, time zones as a way of communicating across languages. And Natalie Moore will share with us the discovery, deep questioning and excitement that a project can provoke. So I'm going to now, as I'm in control of the presentations, also share my screen and launch the PowerPoint, and I'll be introducing each speaker as they come. So Amy Tidmarsh is a multidisciplinary textile designer and researcher driven by a physical, inventive approach to hand-based textile skills. She graduated from Manchester Metropolitan University with a BA Honours in embroidery and teaches across further and higher education, specialising in foundation art and design and textile design. Thank you, Amy.
Thank you, Chloe. Okay, hi, my name is Amy Tidmarsh, and today I want to share with you some of the teaching strategies and methodologies from the Fashion and Textiles Foundation curriculum at Manchester School of Arts or Manchester Metropolitan University, and how I have applied them to my own practice and how you might want to apply them to your practice or any project for that matter. So I have had the opportunity to experience the past year as both an educator and student, and in some ways, extraordinary circumstances presented a perfect storm of experience and experimentation. Today, I kind of want to splice together some of these different viewpoints on very similar themes. So I'm currently studying, I'm graduating on Tuesday at Royal College of Art for a Master's in Textile Design via my bedroom in Leeds. So it's not exactly what I signed up for, but given that I was experiencing the same setup as our Manchester students, it felt like a clear insight into their experience. Alongside studying full-time, I was teaching a few days a week, be it on Microsoft Teams, on Zoom, on Padlet, on Google Drive, so occupying a very similar space to the one I was experiencing at the RCA. This presented a parallel of very physical, practical problems that I experienced as both a student and a tutor. A key component of Foundation stems from an adaptability and flexible approach to problem solving. So accustomed I was to teaching in a very physical way with objects and materials in front of me, I began to have to make connections with my own physical environment and the objects of my own research. Despite the instinctive ways in which I work, my research is driven by rules and instructions, so something that I hold my own foundation education personally responsible for. And I want to share some of these instructions that I took into my own practice over the last push of my MA, inspired by the day-to-day teaching and the resilience of foundation students. So the first thing is make it physical. So in a workshop designed to get students working physically and practically with their hands in lo-fi means with accessible materials, we encourage students to explore the weight and stretch and joining of materials. What does it remind you of? How do your hands respond to it? In teaching this, I noticed my own reluctance to get started. In some ways, the workshop prep and delivery acted as a warm-up for my own investigations. I realized that making ideas tangible was an essential step in embodying your own research and finding interesting or new lines of inquiry. This became about a language to communicate or translate research. Foundation students do this so well because from stage one, we're equipping them with skills in expanded drawing, lateral approaches to problem solving, giving them inventive ways of interrogating and making visual their ideas. My own language for this starts in my notebook, something else that I can thank Foundation for. I use drawings and images, photos and descriptive language to help me unpick and articulate my ideas. In the case of doing an MA online, it also became about a digital language that allowed me to explore physical ideas without the limitations of the real world. So, mime your FMP, mime your final major project. This stemmed from a quick-fire intervention-style pop-up workshop held on site during students' final major projects at Manchester. Armed with 3 to 5 words central to their project and meters of cloth, they were asked to act out or mime out the words in small groups, documenting the results. Doing this gave them an instant material and bodily response to reflect on. Static images or subjects far removed suddenly became personal and accessible. There is an important parallel here between the teaching I received at the RCA and through the teaching foundation students at Manchester. Become your project. In the spring term of this year, so this was alluded to earlier, a fantastic collaborative space was instigated by Joan Beadle at Manchester School of Arts and the foundation course at the British High School of Art and Design in Moscow. We took on the challenge of teaching dynamic draping, performance, and documentation for fashion and textile students across continents and online. Through Zoom workshops with movement specialists at Manchester School of Arts and collaborative interpretive draping sessions using surplus stock donated from Alexander McQueen, foundation students showed us what they were made of, inspiring me to get physical and to take more risks within my own work. And I became my project, which now is a bit embarrassing now I look at it, but we'll go with it. Something really magical happened for me around this time, where I was seeing the grit and determination of students working with simple instructions at home in limited access to resources and limited space, and they were enacting their research in a material and digital ways that came about physical language, making it more bodily. Without access to people, workshops or studios, I turned my own body and living room into a notebook, realizing the performative textiles I was making needed that physical action. It became a way for me to take back control and find a voice again within my work. So this method of miming your final major project in lots of ways is about autonomy, finding your own identity in a language beyond the rational and the expected. It can be a strategy employed at different stages to unstick, to let loose or breathe life into work that has become stationary or safe. The Big Studio project was an example of taking this to the extreme. The distance collaboration that started here showed me how much is possible when you stretch the boundaries of digital space and impose simple rules or structure into live workshops. The last strategy that I want to mention is a foundation favourite, and that is to document everything. Sometimes the best moments were those accidental multi-screenshots showing the pure chaos and excitement of juggling different projects, different time zones, and all those different student experiences. And that brings me to the end of a quick fire sort of rapid foundation year and MA year. I'm keen to continue the conversation, so do get in touch if you've got any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. I am very keen to carry on the conversation, that's for sure. So many things there. Thank you. James Thompson is an artist and lecturer based in Leeds. He graduated with an MA in Design Products from the Royal College of Art in 2012. Subsequently working across sculpture, moving image and performance in response to architectural space. From 2012 until 21, he taught on the Art and Design Foundation course at Leeds Arts University. Over to you, James.
Okay, thank you. Brilliant presentation, Amy, by the way, so I don't know how I'm going to follow that, but so I'm talking about the Inflatable Architectures project, which is run on the foundation at Leeds College of Art, now Leeds Arts University. I'm going to start with a kind of a background of the project. So it's really much kind of came from an extension of ideas that I've been investigating in my own practice. So this is the first inflatable object that I made, cast from sections of parts of architecture in latex and inflated by hand with a hand pump, which took ages. And then kind of progressing these ideas about inflatables. Started using polythene to kind of work on a larger scale and think about ways that can potentially reevaluate spaces and places that kind of in that way. So kind of we started to think about, okay, how can that be kind of applied to a foundation project? So this is kind of a first test in the studios at Vernon Street, figuring out, okay, you know, how can we get kind of architecture students and students working in the object spatial design pathway to be a bit more ambitious with their work and think on a larger scale and really experience sort of architecture. So the project really started with a drawing brief. So these are some of the studios, or one of the studios, and some fragments of architectural details on the Vernon Street building. So initially starting as a drawing project, students kind of looked and found ways to document aspects of the space. So it could be through kind of architectural fragments, details. It could be, as a student on the left, is kind of documenting the movements of people through spaces. Could be making graphs and tally charts. And with that information, they then started to progress and think about ways that, okay, how could you start to expand from two-dimensional or elements from those drawings, two-dimensional drawings, into three-dimensional volumes, and thinking about, okay, right, how that might be done. So the next step is, having done that and thought about volumes, is, okay, right, starting to scale up. And at this point is where students come together working in teams to think about selecting which volume to progress to make a larger scale kind of inflatable object. And quite often, as was in the previous image, the studio itself became kind of like the paper or kind of drawn back onto making formers and grids. And then it was kind of the big inflation or attempt to inflate these kind of fragments of the Vernon Street architecture. So yeah, it's sort of Chloe touched on that. I mean, collaboration and teamwork was really important in being able to kind of extend, you know, work on a larger scale with sort of time limitations. So we kind of made the inflatables. Students made the inflatables, we inflated them in the college building, but as you can see, there isn't a great deal of space. So starting to think about, okay, how can this project work, you know, on a larger scale, potentially in another venue beyond the kind of the educational context, and thinking about, right, how can we kind of open opportunities for students to be kind of working in professional situations. And quite often it was the first time that students had the opportunity. So we took the inflatables and inflated them at a temporary space run by East Street Arts, where I'm a studio holder. So we kind of, so this is the first year that the project ran. It ran for 3 years. So this is in 2016. So the students, we took the inflatables to this warehouse space, and it was really an opportunity to kind of think about the works in a different environment, and also document, you know, starting to develop, you know, portfolio images, but then also, you know, it's that idea of collaboration in terms of how do you work as a team to kind of install your work in another venue, which is, again, you know, setting up students for what happens into practice. So then 2017, we inflated them. Similar project ran, but this is at Leeds Art Gallery. So I've been doing a project with Leeds Art Gallery separately, and that opportunity kind of opened up discussions and potential to kind of the students to kind of work in a gallery or in one of the spaces at the gallery and start to inflate their works. There's always that moment where you're kind of working, the kind of building kind of two-dimensionally, and you never know what they're going to look like until you inflate them, and quite often they're too big for the space. So that kind of happened. And then in the final year that the project ran, 2018, so 2018, 2019, again, working with East Street Arts, they kind of opened up and gave the opportunity to do the kind of the inflatable architecture exhibition and residence. So still kind of based around dimensions, fragments, architectures from the Vernon Street building. But this time we had access to this space in the centre of Leeds, to kind of, again, work quite professionally, but also the opportunity to kind of start to think about how students might adapt their works to work more site-specific in response to that that space. And these are kind of some of the installation shots. And again, I think in terms of the form of the objects, starting to think about, okay, how people might engage with those objects within that space. And again, it's very much about this idea of kind of expanded experience of what architecture is or could be, and really kind of transported from that, you know, from the college building into another space. Yeah, and I should say that, yeah, in the 3 years, so the first year the project was taught alongside Andy Carpenter, I think it's in the audience, and also in the second 2 years with Susie. And yeah, that's it really. Just want to say thanks for the opportunity to speak about the project.
Thank you, James. Sorry, I missed my unmute button. I'd love to know how the students, how that affected the work they did after, in the future, the different areas they went into, but we'll talk about that later. Doug lives and works in Moscow, Doug Bowen, Russia. He is an artist and educator at the British Higher School of Art and Design. Over to you, Doug.
The project I want to talk to you about today is called Plus. It's a group project taught over 1 week on stage 2 after students have selected their specialisation. It's a communication design project and it's still very much as a work in progress. So far, there have been 2 iterations of the project. It was initiated in 2019 with 51 students from Moscow and 20 students from Sao Paulo, continuing in 2020 with 45 Moscow students and 23 counterparts from Beijing. I moved to Moscow in 2019. Expatriation forced me to adapt. How do you communicate or not miscommunicate? And how do you continue professional and personal relationships and friendships from afar? This transition made me think about how the internet allows the opportunity for art and design industries and societies to be globalized. Foundation could begin to address, develop and utilize the ability to effectively communicate with a wide variety of people, audience, clients and collaborators, potentially all of whom speak differing languages. A common ground between all our international art schools is that they are taught in English, as well as the collaborating tutors, Sarah Thomas in China, Michael Burkett in Brazil, and I are all British. British language, narrative, speech, text, description, reports, song, and/or illustration, photo, performance, dance, video are given to students in the form of a starting point. They're all alternative aspects of British society, history, or culture. Ultimately, the starting point is just a material for students to engage with, but students applying to British universities post-foundation may find them interesting insights into British culture. There were 10 groups with approximately 4 Russian students to 2 Brazilian or Chinese students. The starting points given to each group were episode 6, July 2018 of the radio soap opera The Archers, The Legend of the Lambton Worm, the song The Sunny Afternoon by the Kinks, the play The Comedy of Errors by William Shakespeare, the newspaper article Vote for Brexit highlights generational divide from the Daily Mail, the dance, the Nutting Girl Jig, the 1st of March 2002 episode of the TV soap opera EastEnders, the event of Haxie Hood, the Lesbians and Gays Support the Miners' Protest in 1984, issue number 1920, the 5th of May 1979 of Dennis the Menace and Nasha from the comic book The Beano. And the project has 3 constraints. Constraint 1, students must work in other countries' visual language. Post-foundation and BA students may find themselves working with, for, or in another country. Therefore, having the constraint of having to use something unfamiliar is an interesting but tricky proposition, as seen in Von Trier and Let's the 5 Obstructions.
Yes, there he is. Who is he? What can he do?
Hvorfor bevæger han sig på den måde? Kvinder godt kan lide, når han bevæger sig sådan.
But Russia is full of drunk, vodka-intoxicated bears strumming on balalaikas, right? As documented in this answer to a plenary Q&A, students were upset and offended by the ignorant preconceptions of their collaborators, something that I hadn't really considered before. I'd wrongly assumed that there would be more of a dialogue between students to learn about each other's culture. Responding to this failing, myself and Sarah Thomas, Sarah is the communication design pathway leader in Beijing, decided that maybe we should attempt to solve this problem with a visual dictionary. We wrote a series of prep questions on what makes a Russian or Chinese visual language. Students could only answer using images, Russian visual language images selected by Russian students and vice versa. Constraint 2, the format, medium or material of the given starting point cannot be explored. It must be translated into a different format. This forces the students to engage in different methods and processes of translation and reinterpretation, maybe outside of the student's comfort zone. For example, a book cannot make another book, like Jonathan Safran Foer did by removing words from Bruno Schulz's The Street of Crocodiles to form a new narrative in Tree of Codes. But a book can be adapted and choreographed into a ballet, like Wayne McGregor, Jamie XX, and Oliver Eliasson did with Tree of Codes. The format changes and the content is translated. Constraint 3, the projects must be live for 24 hours a day of the project. Somebody somewhere in the world needs to be working on it. Effectively, the students have a studio that operates 24/7. Due to this constraint, it means that whilst part of the group sleeps, the project is still evolving and developing, so they wake up to something new. So students therefore need to devise a strategy in their groups as to how the work is continued with a time difference of over 24 hours. The work is passed on like a relay baton with video call meetings, critiques. Students may have to change their sleeping pattern or differing schedules, e.g. split the group in 3, each subgroup is allocated 8 of 24 hours. As you all know, the first time you do a project, there are things you realize instantaneously that you could improve, tweak, or remove. The next few slides are some of the student work. Whilst they roll by, I want to discuss some of the issues that we faced across the projects and their possible solutions, as well as what's next for the project. So firstly, there were teething problems. There was inconsistent understanding between staff of what the project was asking for. And this obviously had an impact on teaching. A mass staff briefing would probably eliminate this. Secondly, the handover. In 2019, we attempted to have a centralized platform, a Padlet, for sharing and documenting the processes, but this was more of an impersonal aspect, which led the students to miss the handovers. In 2020, we timetabled handovers at the end of Beijing's day and beginning of Moscow's day, and this seemed to work better. The Great Firewall of China made it more difficult for online communication. It was interesting, though, that the students continued to ask their counterparts for advice and feedback on projects. I think this is quite an interesting development, and maybe there's a way for this to be structured more in latter projects to develop independence. Thirdly, structure. Students firstly saw the structured briefings as a burden, but afterwards, quote, "I enjoyed learning how to be organized and the structure wouldn't let us slack off. I also felt the responsibility and dependency of other students." A project can change, adapt, and transform. I'd like to invite lecturers who want to extend the collaboration to new places in the world so that the project orbits the globe. Here's my email if anybody would like to contact me individually to discuss the upcoming academic year. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. What an extraordinary communication design project. Wow, that's going to come up in the conversation after too. Thank you, Natalie. Now to Natalie Moore, who's in Brooklyn, New York. Her work is often described as the intersection between drawing and sculpture. Natalie has been featured in numerous exhibitions nationally and internationally, and she is currently the assistant chairperson of the foundation program at Pratt Institute, where she's been teaching for many years. Over to you, Natalie.
Okay, hi. So over the past year and a half, many of our students have spent a majority of their time slumped over their laptops listening to Zoom lectures like this one. I don't think that I'm the only one who is getting weary of too many days at the same desk working in front of a screen. The project I want to share with you all today aims to address that feeling of disconnect with our physical bodies in a direct way. The prompt is simple: to think about an everyday activity that you take for granted and create something that attaches to your body to make it easier or more difficult. For example, a parachute makes jumping out of an airplane much easier, while a ball and chain would make it difficult to run. I started out with some simple sort of meditation and movement exercises. So let's do a quick version here. So everybody get in a comfortable seating position, take a deep breath in, and a deep breath out. Now, starting with your toes, take a deep breath in, scanning the entirety of your body, all the way up to your head. Did you notice any places where you're holding any tension? Take a breath into there. All right. Now stand up, reach as high as you can. Relax, jump around, move your body a little. Okay, sit back down. All right, thank you all for indulging me with that. The class I was teaching is called Space, Form, Process, which is the 3-dimensional foundation design course at Pratt Institute. The project was towards the end of the semester when students had some confidence in using different materials and construction techniques. One of the goals in this class is to address proprioceptive awareness. So this project addressed the awareness of one's body in space directly. Beyond the examples that I showed you that were in the slide previously, that we looked at choreographers and dancers, artists, designers, and athletes, the students use Meal and Oat board extensively this semester to organize their thoughts, give group feedback, and work on projects. So once the brainstorming began, there were certain body parts and certain actions that, of course, came to the forefront. Since the students spend so much of their time drawing and making with their hands, disabling the ability of their hands was a very popular one that was addressed in different ways. I think next step would be sight. So these are the things they sort of rely so much on as being students. So limiting their neck movement and their peripheral vision, like the examples on the left, or enabling, so creating colored gels that make them see the world a little more wondrously. Some students also were interested in using walking, playing with ideas of balance and foot flexion. There were also some really fun ideas with springs and motors in shoes that I don't really have documentation of today. I had a student from Taiwan last year who took this project as an interesting way to inform her classmates about the stone pathways in her country that are used for foot massage. She used a reflexology diagram to place objects into an insole, which resulted in a somewhat painful walk. And as expected this year, there were also a fair number of designs with social distancing in mind. This student exaggerated the ubiquitous punk dog collar of the 1970s to ensure others were kept at least 6 feet away. And this next student took a more elegant approach by creating a loosely woven garment of bamboo strips that would spin out in a circular direction to keep others away if needed, or others at a distance if needed. I can't say others away, sorry about that. And some students, again, approached it from a very pragmatic level, finding solutions to their everyday frustration. This student designed a portable table with folded legs that could act as a handbag and then attach around her waist and use for an impromptu dining al fresco or a drawing table. And several of my students like to have their hands manicured and found it difficult to type efficiently with freshly shaped nails. This student created an accessory made of wire and clay that could fit over her fingertips and let her type more quickly. And there were other students who took the opportunity to inform their classmates about a disability. This student is deaf in one ear and was interested in creating empathy for others with limitations in their senses. She was inspired by the masquerade and created a mask that limited vision to only one eye. Another student had back surgery recently and still needed to wear a brace. She found the current braces were uncomfortable and unattractive. She looked at corsets for inspiration and designed and sewed a corset-type brace, a stiff foam pad to keep her back stabilized. And in this next example, the student wanted to use this opportunity to talk about their battles with depression. They wanted to find a way to make their unseen disability visible. One of the manifestations of depression is a lack of self-care and the almost unsurmountable effort it takes one to do something simple as to brush their teeth. This mask not only makes it difficult to reach one's teeth, but also casts a sickly yellow pallor with the yellow lenses she designed. I've only taught this assignment twice, once in the studio in the fall of 2019, and again this past semester, 2021, online with students spread across the world. It not only gave them a chance to think about their bodies and how to move around physical space after spending so much time in a virtual world, it also created a sense of empathy with each other. I found with this assignment and others that if you create parameters that give them where students can find themselves in the work, these first-year students come up with results that are sometimes surprising, ingenious, hilarious, and deeply moving. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm just going to bring us stop sharing, bring us back. Amazing, again, set of presentations that are just firing my mind off, like the first section. I think we do have some questions. I'm going to be fielding them from the audience. Let me just see. I'll read out, they're coming through. Amy's sketchbooks are wonderful and reveal the importance of experimentation and informing decisions in practice. Just wondering how the experience of working remotely with foundation art and design students has impacted on students creating, experimenting and documenting in sketchbooks. That's a brilliant question. That's one I had written down. How do you keep up that visual documentation of your ideas? The students, how do you keep them motivated to do that when you're not with them in the studio?
I think what I found was that the sketchbook actually became expanded. So before it had to be a thing that fit into a bag that you could get on the bus. I remember conversations with students who would hate to bring their portfolios into college because they would go traveling on trains and it was commuting, whereas suddenly there isn't that sort of size or space restriction. And actually the sketchbook started to take forms of different sorts of platforms. So at Manchester, students were encouraged to use their notebooks and different notebooks for different things. But at the same time, there were Padlets that became a sort of a digital space. Sometimes students were using Instagram and social media as a way to collate and sort of process imagery. And actually, I think because of that, there was more sort of inclusion of moving image and video as a way to sort of communicate ideas. And it became less static. I think, weirdly, looking back and reflecting on my own notebook there, it feels very sort of regimented and rectangular. And that's possibly just speaks of how I tend to work. But I think the students actually had a more flexible approach that fits the environments that they were working in. And it became possibly more haphazard, but I personally appreciated the energy that came from it, and it became sort of less sort of perfectionist about, okay, I must cut down that image and put it right there. It was a little bit more chaotic, and I really appreciated that.
No, I was wondering, actually, it's a question to all of you. Do you feel that this pandemic year has maybe changed the way we change our expectations, or change the parameter, or shifted the parameters of what we hope for a documentation of a process somehow? I don't think we could go back to, like you say, it looks kind of like dated now, just the sketchbook. Yes. That was before 2020.
I think it's definitely, it showed me what it can be. And I think definitely from being a student in it and also teaching has shown me how much I need to learn, because I'm still very much, I think the first thing I did was I bought a printer, because I was like, how on earth am I going to print the images out for my sketchbook? And even just saying that, I'm like, oh, come on, you don't need to have the sketchbook in the same way. And actually it's shown how inventive and how personal the student work is. And that's the thing that really speaks to me, is that students are making work and documenting work in this really multifaceted way that I think should be embraced. I feel like I can't quite do it for myself yet, though I've got an Instagram that's like halfway there, isn't it? Kind of there.
Do any of the rest of you use Milanote?
Ooh,
we use this Milanote program, and it's amazing. It's like a living sort of online bulletin board sketch things, but you can put in, you can attach attach videos and sketches, and students give peer feedback, and you can have as many boards as you want, and some that are more sort of for brainstorming, some more for finished work. So students, it's like this kind of living sketchbook, and it's been incredible for my class.
Would you share that?
Yeah.
Would you share that, Natalie, and we can share it with everybody. I've got somebody. Just before I sorry, the audience. I was just on the back of that. I just had a question. It was something that's kind of linking Natalie as well, and Doug's too. But do you think that the online space or the virtual space has naturally, in a way, encouraged more intimacy, or projects that are more that students feel they are less vulnerable in this format than if they're in a bigger studio space? Because you speak about, deeply moving project, or students sharing something or making a work about something they might not have done in a bigger, more intimidating situation. I don't know. I found the online space to be very intimate.
I think that also it sort of depends on the students. Students that are normally a little more confident and outgoing feel quite comfortable in an in-person studio sort of sharing things, but for, I think, the majority of our students, it just feels a little safer to keep it, so they're, they can express something, or they can give, to go into things. And sort of the feedback I also found from, especially using the Milanote, where the students give sort of like written note, sort of in-process critiques, is gentler and more supportive, and actually more helpful and constructive, not so much like, oh, this is cool, but really like thoughtful. And I think it sort of created a classroom community that was, in general, I think, a little more empathetic than can be in person, where you have sort of, you may have the cliques or certain, certain groups that tend to be together. Everybody was sort of on a level playing ground. And I think also somebody else, lots of people mentioned this, that the pandemic also is kind of humbling that way. It sort of, gives a preciosity to life, or gives sort of like, I guess, like, why hold up airs? I mean, we're like, there's so much else going on. Like, why is it worth to sort of like try to, to hold up a certain, I don't know, an air about yourself or your persona or who you think you are? You can just, it's okay. We're all okay,
Yeah, just the cool, you let go of the cool a bit.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is what you did, Amy, didn't you? In your,
Yeah.
Which is great, which we all appreciate. What is from Michael Burkitt? What is non-negotiable when writing an online foundation project? What is non-negotiable? That's open to all of you here. That's a good question.
It is, because you definitely had to rethink how you structure projects with an online space. I think because it's a thing that I'm quite a risk averse person, despite me prancing around in the living room with a big net. I tend to keep things quite safe. So I think a project for me, if I'm thinking about, I think someone spoke about wanting to learn as an educator, you always want to think about what you're gaining from a project yourself. And I thoroughly believe that it's a big reciprocal, lovely cycle. I would want risk-taking to be in there, and finding a way to do risk-taking when you're in a safe space is hard, because suddenly it's like, well, do I want to do it? Can I do it? What's the impact of it? And especially when there isn't a tutor, or usually be me prodding by someone's desk going, have you done it yet? Have you done it? You don't really have that same sort of impact. I mean, I tried on Teams, let's be honest, but they can mute you on Teams, whereas in real life, you can't be muted. For me, it would definitely be trying to find a way for students to take risks when their environment is relatively safe, or that would be my big one. I think
also, Doug, just bringing your project into the conversation here, I appreciated how open you were with the risks you took as teachers, and the kind of the failures or the things that didn't work, and then you had to that then is shaping how the project evolves. Just being kind of open about that. It's such a complex project across the languages and cultures, and the possibility of mistranslation is just key all the way along.
Yeah, it wasn't a slick. I didn't want it to sound like it was a slick operation or something. It wasn't. Yeah. Like especially if one group missed or didn't do anything or didn't turn up, or it's then the students are kind of like, well, what do we do then? You kind of your kind of responses to that then has like a lasting impact on how the students are also going to kind of negotiate the project. So it was quite interesting. The project wasn't because of the pandemic. It actually happened. The China one happened just before, like just as everything was kind of kicking off. So it wasn't kind of written for the pandemic, but I think just sort of in hindsight, what it has done is being able to, when those sort of doors were kind of being closed a little bit and people were having to isolate, it also gave these different sort of connections to these other people that were having similar sorts of experiences in other places of the world. So it was quite, I don't know, it was quite good for, I think, mental health and things for students, actually keeping those different sort of connections. even though such big cultural differences as well.
It's quite mind-blowing that the world is affected by the same thing. That was something that I found extraordinary, working internationally online.
It's sort of a COVID-proof project in a way, which is need it.
So Elizabeth, there's some notes, some people making comments here. The pandemic has, from Elsbeth Mackey, pandemic has definitely changed parameters. For some, being off paper has opened doors, but for others, they've lost the directness of ideation in notebooks, and the fallout will be to rethink what we perceive as a notebook. Yeah, or what we, I suppose, define as a notebook. And then Elaine says, as Natalie mentioned, many anxious students have found a voice through textual communication online. Yeah, that's really key, isn't it? And it says, again from Liz Elsbeth, is it more thoughtful in writing because it's fixed and usually requires more consideration? The spoken word can be flippant as it can be immediately lost in space. And the ability to refer back to what is written can be invaluable when trying to digest complex information for many. The dialogue and sharing between students this year has been dynamic in its depth and understanding of the power of support. I don't know if this chimes with you all, but I've done more written teaching, if you can say that, this year than in my entire career, which has made me way more thoughtful and careful and considerate. I don't know if you're nodding your head, so that's a brilliant point.
Oh yeah, definitely. I think just I was saying about the immediacy of text though as well. So yes, it has to have more thought built into it, but there is that other side of it which students can access you and you can access them in this other sort of space. And then in some ways that became really important for supporting students and being able to give quick feedback. But there's also that point of working out when do you stop, because otherwise I can keep typing. That's my problem. Can't stop. And yeah, it's working out, like you're saying, it's got to be meaningful, it's got to be timely, and it's putting those in place like you would do in the physical studio. You're not there to answer every question at all points, but you're a place for meaningful sort of support and feedback. Yeah, absolutely. I wonder, James, are you going to share how you actually make one of those sculptures? Is it hard? Because I think we all want to do one.
It's not actually that difficult. I think as soon as you kind of can work out, I think the difficulty is sort of the translation, I guess, from the 2D, trying to figure out what on earth it's going to be like when you inflate this thing, you know, because there are no like straight edges. So you might make a cube, right, but actually it becomes round. so it's like, how do you try to sort of create form when you're working with the polythene? But in terms of the actual, you know, making of them, it's just, you know, regular, you know, sellotape, the actual structures of it, you know, it's fine. It's just, trying to figure out how you can kind of control the volume almost.
You're on. I think it's a challenge for everyone in this audience, so we will make one. Or try at least. That's nice. I'm just making sure that I haven't missed anyone's question here. Someone very lovely asked about instructions for a drawing class, if that's available anywhere, and I'll let you know, Howard. Are there any, because I think we've just got a couple more minutes, we're going to have a luxury break of 10 minutes this time, so that we can rest our eyes. I have to say, Natalie, I really appreciated doing the stretch and the breathing there, because that is what is lost, isn't it, on this, in this format always. You brought it back to the body. Do you do that with your students?
Yeah, it's much longer. So I do a full 10-minute really body scan, like a traditional body scan meditation with them. And then I do a bunch of sort of movement exercises that are, some are from choreographic practices, and some are just like general movement practices. So how to move around a space, you know, without touching anything, or how to move on a space with only using one leg, or with your arms tied behind your back. Like how does it feel when you intentionally disable or able something? And just to get their ideas flowing, but also just to get them off of their desk and start moving and breathing and thinking a little bit.
All right, with that thought in mind, I'm going to encourage everyone to move and breathe and, you know, put your head out the window or something to wake up for the last, well, I'm very awake. I'm very awake with all of that exciting input. But we will come back at 5 p.m. UK time. So 10-minute break. We'll be still here. Well, I'll be here getting something to drink and resting our eyes. All right, see you all in 10 minutes.
Yeah, I'm hoping you had a good break. These presentations are absolutely flying by. So I find myself here doing the third strand already, but my mind's still buzzing with all the previous presentations as well. So thankfully I've written some notes, and I'll try and focus for the next bit and introduce the third strand. The third strand today is Foundation Pedagogy. It's a huge pleasure to introduce this strand. Joining in with the time-bound nature of the Pecha Kuchas, everyone's done. I've written my notes to keep me on task, on time, and try and fit in within my 5 minutes. So I've been thinking today about what I'd like to say by way of introduction, and thought I'd reflect briefly on collective endeavour and how this relates to our teaching, pedagogies and wider creative practice. Within the recent publication London Art Schools, with the chapter titled Shifting Foundations, Hester Westley characterised the emergence of foundation course with tutors constantly scrutinising their approaches and debating the virtues of the old and new pedagogical approaches. These efforts reflected changes in what arts practice meant and attempts to develop teaching approaches and activities that reflected this. At the end of this chapter, Westley states that to revisit the history of foundation is to read the narrative of a once and future course. This thread is titled Foundation Pedagogy. The presentations reflect the scrutiny that Westley referred to. We revisit what we do, both to look at our existing and our future courses. Revisiting and considering what others do is a critical component of any reflective teaching practice. So I thought I'd share some of my own experience here. When I say my own, of course, it's informed by colleagues, peers in other institutions, dialogues with artists, creatives, wider networks, and not least the students themselves. My own research into foundation courses has tended to reflect on the collective experience common to foundation. And briefly, these collective experiences include early summer schools and forums of our predecessors, the idea of a shared brief or prompt, cross-disciplinary working, collaborative projects and outcomes, and this familiar proximity through the staff to a wider community of practice. Working with colleagues, we've fed much of this reflection into the development of Foundation Press, and I can see similar concerns and attributes within projects of many of my peers, including Chloe's amazing work with Drawing is Free, Sean's with Blip, 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 as well as the teaching projects and strategies seen in presentations today. This month's AN magazine is guest edited by Shai Bairns, a print collective and alumni of our foundation course. The issue puts a focus on collective endeavour and how artists work together to build their own art worlds. It includes input from alternative art schools, such as the long-established Islington Mill Art Academy, more recent collectives such as Rabbit's Road Press, Turner Prize-nominated arts activists Array Collective, and the influential designer Fraser Muggeridge. Obviously, this makes me really proud, but also indicates the many ways how the skills and attributes developed on foundation seem particularly important to creative practice today. Alongside arts practices that themselves have become more cross-disciplinary and cross-fertilized, emerging practitioners need to be flexible and responsive, skills that any foundation explicitly aims to encourage. Even the notion of portfolio building or creative presentation has become a key component of any creative practice. These examples illustrate the point that the way we all teach, our pedagogies are tailored to develop skills and also attributes specific to the changing context that we live and work within. So to sum up, in researching the history of foundation, one of the things that's most interesting is how this reflection on the nature of provision involved discussion between many different individuals, different courses and different contexts. And we can look back and find a lot of information on pedagogies within basic design, but I've discussed this with colleagues that you can find less perhaps on what's happened over the last 50 years. So we take our lead from this idea of the continuing process and attempt to fill in these gaps. So I know all the presentations in this thread will connect to different aspects of our teaching and the activities that take place within our courses. I know that they'll also give food for thought and offer points of reflection as we scrutinise our approaches, as we rethink our existing and future courses. Thanks to all of our contributors today. This thread will include presentations from Jonathan Kellum, Utavia George, Geraldine Snell, and Magnus Quaife. Okay. So I've got short intros on everyone. So it's Jonathan next. Yeah. Jonathan is an artist, researcher, and educator based in Bristol. He is shown internationally in group and solo shows, including Dundee Contemporary, Spike Island, and the Netherlands Institute for Sound and Vision. Jonathan is a senior lecturer and subject coordinator of the Integrated Foundation at Bath Spa University. Jonathan.
Hello. So I guess I'm going to talk you through some ideas about the suitability and kind of hypothesize some developmental ideas on digital project space within the foundation context and how they're kind of, I guess, most suited to and possibly mostly kind of organizational within that foundation context. And I've called it slippy, sloppy, smooth space, which refers to a flowers and plateaus and kind of talks about that indefinable quality of the smooth. And I guess in that kind of ambiguous manner, that title changes pretty much every week. There's loads of context and there's probably too many things that I want to talk about, but just to give you a kind of an overview, I currently teach on the foundation and I've only been doing that in the pandemic years. That's what I'm calling them at the moment. So it's great to see that everybody else is doing stuff outside of that context. But I've also taught A-levels for 5 years and been an external examiner on that side. I taught in school, which was horrible, but let's not go there. And then I ran a BA in fine art for a bit. So they're the kind of context that I'm coming from. But at this moment in time, I run the foundation and it's based at Locksbrook. It's a 4-year program that runs onto all of the School of Art Design pathways. The students have all of this kind of undergraduate experience, I guess. And that for some is, I guess, subjectively kind of problematic. And that kind of leads me on to some of the problems that we see within the foundation when it's sit within this higher education kind of context. It's maybe lost some of those autonomous and regional frameworks, and it feels like actually that through government-led initiatives, which we all know about, it's kind of become this consumer creative education. So it's got this weird like orbage going on as a kind of a space within this higher education. That's kind of suggested that it's become almost kind of loose and ambiguous, the course that I work on. It doesn't really sit within the established administrative or pedagogical process of the wider university. And so it feels slightly uncomfortable. So it sits within this kind of heterotopic space within a space. This is the drawing I did to try and examine that, and it's awful. And I did it late on Sunday night when Chloe was saying, get your, I need to get the presentation in. So I just apologize for it. I guess the black lines are the foundation and the other lines are my experience of working on those different courses that level 4, level 5 and 6, and then at level 3 with the foundation. But what was really interesting was the kind of come back from that kind of monopolization of creative endeavor and the alt ed pedagogy, and how that maybe ran alongside the kind of ideas of Open School East and School Demand and all of those other things that are going on, and the parallels between that and the foundation program, talking about risk taking. So here's me again. This was an artist-led project and space, which I was able to use after I graduated. A lot of the work was rubbish and it was daft and silly, and I lost some of my critical eye, but the time went really quickly and it was really ambiguous, and it allowed me not to really think about things too much and take those risks, which we've already been talking about. And that kind of led me on to, okay, what is this pedagogical project space thing going on? So it's these recurring kind of qualities that you find within stuff that's happened when you've left art school and you go, shit, what do I do next? Where do I go? So the kind of ambiguous risk taking, temporary, maybe kind of process driven, where you're working with kind of transformative things outside of that kind of wider context. And I wanted to see, is that possible within the foundation? The foundation feels kind of fluxy and smooth and a bit risky and a bit alt, certainly in where I work at the moment. And so I nabbed the Bauhaus framework and thought about how the digital project space and the physical project space maybe can be those things. Interestingly, Locksbrook was designed without a project space, a physical project space in it, which was a bit crazy, but anyway, design. So what, essentially, I'm going to talk about some of the projects that I've done previously, looking at digital project spaces and how they're kind of informing what happens next. It will appear, hopefully. Look, here it goes. This is like an interlude. There we go. So Ugo Project Space was a thing that I set up in Southampton and ran alongside the British Art Show. It was basically a shit billboard in a terrible part of Southampton. And the interesting things were kind of the change that happened overnight, the fact that it was degrading, the fact that it kind of maybe was interspersed within these really random spaces within the city. And that took me on to the digital project space Ugo Point 2, which was developed as part of the undergraduate program, looking at artists and students who were making things really materially and how that could be translated onto that online context. But we also did things like collaborations on Word documents that became kind of more formalized prints. Maybe it became too formal. That's one thing that happened. And so I decided to get some artists in who were really bad at digital. So Olivia Bax came in and made her first ever GIF, and there was this kind of empathy of the students seeing this artist that we could see on Instagram or having shows and making things. And John Robinson did the same thing, who's a painter. He produced a performance. And I guess that kind of all leads into the idea of the perceived risk and the risk paradox, which Amy was talking about earlier, and kind of having that space, which actually isn't really a risk. It's a business institution. We're kind of moving out of an A-level context, but it still is really kind of tight. That kind of translatory experience isn't really happening. Unless we call it cool and we call it something like a lab or an experiment. And so I'm going to tell you some of the 3 projects that are about to happen at Bath and how we're going to kind of try and explore the digital project space a little bit further. And the first is kind of looking at, I guess, a mytho-fad. So ideas of fictioning and Simon O'Sullivan, David Burrows, where they're looking at open-ended kind of new modes of existence. So kind of non-binary, post-human, non-human things. To kind of speculate on a new foundation, and again bringing ideas of amateurism and kind of just a DIY ethos, which links back to that artist-led kind of project spaces, and then kind of having artists come in selected by the students who are looking at kind of risk paradox and third space theory. So kind of creating this hyperbolic, safe, super safe space where all of these artists show how bad they are at doing stuff, and everything becomes okay, and then the students can kind of be bad and figure it out and bumble through it as well. And that's something that we're really interested in kind of exploring. And then the final one is looking at those futures. So like kind of post-human, post-COVID, incorporating more AR, anti-university, maybe disruptive tech, maybe linking, I don't know, it's located in a mining rig on a Bitcoin thing, and we have a project space there. And they kind of link in with the other projects that we do on a wider kind of context, so world building, fiction and manufacturers. And just to kind of, I guess, reiterate, I guess the foundation feels like the space where this can work most excitingly. Maybe it's on the dark web, maybe it's on Animal Crossing, maybe we put it in a space which is constantly erased and work is never produced or documented or kind of evolved, and it feels really kind of, I guess, risky. Let's go with risky. Goes on forever. I shouldn't have spoken so quickly.
Hi there, Jonathan. That's fantastic. I think the element of risk has returned and definitely got me thinking about the safe spaces and Instagram as well, actually, funnily enough. Anyway, I've got to introduce but the next talk is by Utavia George, Foundation Year of Soil. Utavia is an artist and educator. After earning a Bachelor's of Art in Art Education from the University of Bahamas and a Master's of Fine Art in Drawing from Paris College of Art, she participated in several national art exhibitions and diverse artist in residence programs. Currently, Utavia lives and works between France and the Bahamas. Over to you, Utavia.
Hi, everyone. Okay, my name is Utavi George, if you didn't hear already. I'm from the islands of the Bahamas, and I'm currently working in Paris, France. I really enjoy working in the outdoors generally, and I pretty much impart that onto my students in the foundation year. I really enjoy working with foundation students because it keeps me enthusiastic, up to date, and critical. And it's just a pleasure to have the opportunity to briefly talk to you about my process and my pedagogical stance, basically. So, and why we should celebrate the foundation year in the fine arts as a whole. So the foundation year in visual arts education is critical to the art student, as is the existence of Soil for a Plant. It should be student-centered, inquiry-based, and filled with tribulations and successes of discovery learning. That's how I feel. But first, let's consider those seeds, though, and how they symbolize our students. The types of seeds and plants, knowing who is who, which plants need scaffolding, and in what ways is so important. Getting to know the students and how they engage with space and how they could basically move around in the institution is more important in the beginning with foundation students. So the following elements in the soil that I will mention varies considerably depending on the type of student that you have. So the foundation year is essential for students to manipulate different elements and principles of design in expanding a process, idea, action, visual, or experience. It is also important for networking in the institution with peers, lecturers, and external artistic communities that structure the soil. I believe water, fluid, and seemingly shapeless is for experimentation and inquiry-based techniques, asking the right questions, long discussions to produce informed opinions, personal processes, and artistic development in the studio is critical. At this moment, foundation as soil seeks to foster sprouts of interest, which are already inside the seed or the transferred replanted plant, symbolically like newly enrolled students. And then nitrogen as fertilizer, it's all about supporting students' personal internal development by using external elements such as exposure to art books, podcasts, museums, galleries, workshops, visiting artists, lectures, academic talks, student life activities, and the list can go on. The energy here is focused on growing stalks and foliage. And then we have sunlight. And sunlight is concerned with fostering this vertical expansion through supportive electives that cultivate leaves and budding towards new areas of interest. Painting, drawing, three-dimensional studies, photography, film, cultural studies, critical writing, and transdisciplinary new media are examples of rays of sunlight to me. Then you have oxygen, and oxygen within the soil, allowing students to have this space to discover, to recognize their successes, their failures, but more importantly, to give students a space to learn how to select and edit their work and to meet personal goals. And hereafter, this kind of possibility of forming an artistic plan for the future. The bedrock, reinforcing a sound understanding of rules and procedures as respectful and critical members of the university, the art community, and the global community, fortifying relationships between each other as well. And you might think, well, what's happening on the surface? On the surface, they're developing into sound, creative, critical thinkers who are learning to examine and analyze the work of others and their work with critical consciousness and distance. That's something that we try to promote in Foundation. And then we have time. Foundation as Soil needs a steady flow of visitors, a yearly curriculum review to match the growing pace of current seeds, a curriculum that allows periods of reflection and regular intervals of constructive feedback.
Are they Utopia? Is that you finished there? That's
no.
you. Sorry.
And lastly, coffee and espresso, the product returned to gardeners laboring to cultivate this yearly production. Well, that's you all. From my experience, I'm of the belief that the layout and the administration of the first year arts education is crucial to the art student like soil for a plant. It is essential, truly essential, to consider how the vital elements of earth can symbolize our natural organic selves while moving through and in space. Thank you.
I can tell you're finished now, you tell me. That's great. That was brilliant. Really different environment from the previous presentation, and this idea of teachers as co-creators, I think, is really evident within that one. So thank you. The next presentation is from Geraldine Snell. It's called What is Foundation For? Instrumentalism, Emancipation, Individuation. Geraldine is a London-based artist and lecturer and subject specialist in fine art, media and education. After teaching at Leeds Arts University's Foundation Diploma, during which she gained a postgraduate diploma in education and an MFA Fine Art Media from the Slade, she joined the University of Westminster in October 2020 to develop its foundation year, which she now co-leads. And Geraldine is up next. Thanks.
Thanks. I changed the name to integration from individuation, by the way, but we'll get onto that. I just want to note as well, I liked what Utavia did there because she left time. Got that eventually. I'm going to take a breath before my slides begin whooshing forward. Okay, so what is Foundation For? This is going to be a bit of a different, or a bit more of a theoretical sort of presentation than Duncan's presentation of the same title earlier. It's going to reflect on, consider and question the kind of role and function, in sort of inverted commas, of the Foundation Art and Design course in the globalised, marketised education economy. Obviously, this is from my particular perspective. I studied on a further education funded UK diagnostic foundation course at Leeds College of Art in 2010, which is now Leeds Arts University, and then taught there between 2016 and 20. The course is very conceptually rigorous. It really emphasises problem solving, critical thinking, critical research, reflection on contemporary practice, definitely. It's definitely not a kind of carousel-based skills approach. Leeds had a cohort of around 300 students, some of which, like me, were local students commuting in, benefiting from the free year, but many of which moved to Leeds from all over the world. In October 2020, I moved to commence a full-time lecturer role on Westminster, University of Westminster's foundation year. So that's year one of a 4-year BA, or year zero, as we call them in the UK. Really, the course kind of serves the BA degrees in photography, fine art, mixed media, animation, illustration, visual communication, graphic communication design, and contemporary media practice. So it doesn't have the same diagnostic function as the sort of general foundation course, because students have essentially already chosen their discipline. So talking about instrumentalism, whilst there are points that I idealise foundation years as a boot camp of creative wonder, or as Paul mentioned earlier, sort of something that can be offered to citizens on a mass scale instead of military service, for example, generally they sit between compulsory education and specialist education, offering a route to higher education. Certainly in the UK further education context, much of the curriculum now is more explicitly focused around progression and professional practice, which has kind of been something that's increased in the increasingly instrumental further education sector, sort of following on from New Labour. In terms of students, they're generally entering further and higher education from an environment where they've received really highly instructional feedback. They've got maybe a dependency culture on exams, assessment. So foundation is really about kind of emancipating them almost from that, while still helping them to integrate and progress. So I'm kind of illustrating emancipation here with Bastian Arder sort of crying into his hands, as well as current student Lisa Lang's work. There's most of the work on the slides, by the way, is foundation students, current and former, except this, which is Eve Klein's Leap into the Void, pictured here with the actual support that you don't see in the image of this seminal photography work. So it's clear that foundation's emancipatory function is actually more akin to that. Definitely what we do really on foundation, I think, is foster an environment within the studio which embraces not knowing, where we can create a safe space to risk, to fail, support students in entering a mode of practice and inquiry that is pretty dramatically different from previous educational experience. For Dean Hughes, creative pedagogy must enable or encourage conditions that permit dwelling, where students of creative work might locate being idle, lazy, so where boredom, staring, blinking, and other such essentials of artistic work that are occluded by dominant ideology. So that brings me on to integration. Foundation educators empower students to be both innovative artists and designers, as well as creative, caring citizens by creating challenging, supportive communities that really promote criticality, adventure, and resilience within and beyond the educational context. If art cannot be taught, as James Elkins stated in 2001, integration can be one of the functions of foundation studio teaching. This sentiment of art not being able to be taught is echoed by Salazar. It's no longer clear what an artist needs to know or needs to know how to do. Dana Beluigi's supervisor of creative education does not so much teach skills as mediates between the student and the professional community of practice. So really integration foundation helps to facilitate that, them kind of clarifying their achievements or their desires for their creative work through participation in community. Just to bring a quote here, the well-being of creative arts subjects may be taken as a measure of the health of education as a whole, if one takes the purpose of education, as Herbert Reed does, to be a process not only of individuation, but also of integration. So that's the reconciliation of individual uniqueness with social unity. And that's a quote from Adams. So how? I'm going to finish really with 10 tenets of teaching foundation. This initially is, oh God, I need to read them really quickly. So welcome and accept them as they are. Actively listen, make and hold space for their creative expression and inquiry, reframe failure and rules, build resilience and autonomy, give permission, unconditional positive regard, question to promote clarity, don't peddle orthodoxies, permit possibilities, introduce and integrate into contemporary practice, and lastly, offer hows. So what is foundation for? I think, yes, we are a rung on a ladder, but as this 1 and 3 ladders work, which is a restaging of Joseph Boys's 1 and 3 chairs done by foundation fine art students at Leeds, sort of suggests or poses what actually is a ladder. And those are my references. This is like something I definitely learned teaching at Leeds. Have your references on your last slide of your Pecha Kucha, because that's something we said to the students, all the time. Thank you.
Thanks so much there, Geraldine. Absolutely fantastic. I wish we could hold on to that slide also of the 10 tenets of teaching foundation. It looked brilliant. And some really interesting questions about professionalism again, but maybe people can respond to those in the chat. The final presentation today is by Magnus Quaife. Magnus is an artist and educator and researcher. He's Professor of Fine Art Pedagogy at UniArts Helsinki, where his research focuses on the role of artists as educator within art schools. He's previously worked at Manchester School of Art for over 15 years and has taught at all levels from foundation to PhD at schools internationally. Founding director of Teaching Painting and studied at Chelsea and Manchester School of Art. Over to Magnus.
Thank you very much, Joe. Thanks to everyone else as well for their wonderful presentations. Seems my slides have already started, so I'll crack on. It's often claimed that arts education is or can be transformative, but is this actually true? The Danish pedagogical theorist Knud Illeris has suggested that the term is now so widely used that it is becoming a floating signifier, a buzzword without clear meaning. I've taught on foundation and worked with undergraduate fine arts students for some time. And it's apparent to me that, in general, students who've completed a foundation are not only better equipped for degree level study, and also develop a broader conception of art, but they're more open-minded about art and the world more generally, more attuned to the potential of critique, and often more mature. In short, this comparatively brief course has a profound impact on the learner as a creative and as an individual. I want to speculate as to why this may be, and to do so, I'm going to use quite a few ideas from Camille Lewis. To transform is to reshape and to change, but transformative learning, as established by Jack Meserov in the 1970s and 80s, focuses on learning that results in a qualitatively new structure or other capacities in the individual. Most often, these capacities are considered in terms of the personal. There is a transformation in the individual's identity as much as their scholarly ability. And for Meserov, this is fundamentally about creating meaning in the learner's life. Now, I don't want to claim that foundation courses are transformative in the terms of Meserov or Illyris, etc., but rather to suggest that several characteristics are shared, and hence we should not be surprised if aspects of the programs are experienced as transformative for the learners. For many students, foundation is their first experience of learning as change rather than learning as accumulation, as previous learning is challenged as opposed to being built upon. Learning and change, learning as change, is a fundamental characteristic of transformative education. A second common characteristic is the combination of intensity, which has been mentioned in some of the talks today, and being goal-driven. And I think we're probably all familiar with the intensity of foundation. And I think the goal is clear for many of the students, and that's to get into their first choice of further study. Edward Taylor has identified 5 core elements of the practice of transformative learning. He starts with individual experience, which is developed on foundation through a focus on the student's emerging practice and the meaning they are creating through it. Critical reflection, which is fostered through the group crit and the development of critical thinking skills in tutorials, connecting material and process with meaning and developing new meaning perspectives, both collectively and for the individual through dialogue. Holistic orientation. Foundation connects the learner's self, the personal and emotional aspects of their practice. It connects their ambition with broader contexts. It points ideas towards the individual, and it points the individual towards the world. In doing so, it develops an awareness of context, not just the artistic and creative, but the political, social, philosophical, etc. Moreover, this awareness is developed collectively amongst a group of learners. Finally, Taylor highlights authentic relationships, particularly between the students and educators. And I think we can equate this with John Thompson's description of desire as a fundamental part of arts education. Working with Jody Yarrick, Taylor has also identified shared principles of transformative education. And these include a purposeful and heuristic process. I think on foundation, we can identify this in thinking through making, a kind of thinking with the hands as problem solving, if you like. Another of those aspects is leading learners to the edge, and several people have spoken today already about risk taking. It's taking learners to the edge of their knowledge, experience, and ability. And on foundation, I think it also means the edge of their creativity and understanding of what art and design may be. It also includes the idea of modeling. And I think this is a problematic idea. It's the educator as role model. But on foundation, I think we also point out to other models in artists and designers who may influence the student. Patricia Cranton and Ellen Carasetta have identified qualities that the educator or role model must foster. They are a strong sense of self-awareness, a deep awareness of the needs and interests of the learner and how they may differ from their own. They must foster the ability to be open with others, develop awareness of how context shapes practice, and engaging critical reflection and critical self-reflection in relation to that practice. And I wanted to mention this because I want to acknowledge how important the educator is in this process. Just a few thoughts that I would like to finish with. Foundation does not transform into a fixed state, but prepares the learner for a more consistent change and flux. It is, I believe, the first stage on an extended journey of becoming. Foundation's ambition to transform learners into fledgling artists and designers, while being connected to identity, is, I think, too specific to be transformative learning in the equation of Meserole. Instead, I think it might be possible to think about foundation as transformative teaching. And this idea in itself is problematic. And that's me.
Fantastic. Thanks so much there, Magnus. Really summed up a lot of the approaches throughout, there have been threads throughout the day, really brought together very well. So yeah, I'm going to kick off with the questions that are in the Q&A, and if people want to add to that, then please do. And I guess yeah, we've got some. Actually, it's question. The first one that's leapt up is for Jonathan, which is any tips on how we continue to push for experimental pedagogies within the ever more restrictive confines of the institution?
I mean, I guess that kind of Paul mentioned it earlier, you know, the fact that it is a one-year program, even if they're in a 4-year kind of continuum, it's always kind of moving and rotating and having to evolve. So one of the really obvious things is that the modules that we run are really kind of adaptable and ambiguous, and you can kind of stretch them and respond to what's happening in each cohort, because they're always different. I think the other great thing is to have people on side that kind of get that ethos that you want to have. So whether it's our external examiner, who's Claire McCormack at UAL, you know, if I want somebody to back me up in a kind of pedagogical, ethos driven thing, and say, actually, we do want to have a digital show on like the dark web and all of the problematic ethical things that might come about that. We've got like the heads of school and external examiners who can go to maybe more of the higher educational, institutional establishment and kind of pitch the ideas and try and contextualize it in a way that means that they're okay with it. Also, maybe don't tell them about it. Can I say that? Is that all right? Is that all right?
We're in our very own safe space here, Jonathan. We can say what we like.
That would be my things. I can't think of anything else off the top of my head.
Utavia, again, I mean, talking about safe spaces, your talk made me think very much about Instagram and whether that reflected a sort of community of practice, or was kind of imposing certain restrictions or judgments on students' work. But Utavia was also talking about different environments within her work. Would you like to say anything about the environment you're trying to create there, Utavia, in terms of risk?
I think that the environment's already there. Just going out and explore, because that's like, for me, the greatest reflection of creativity is the environment, the natural world. So I'm not creating it, it's already there. You just have to explore and find out what is it that you want to pull out, tease out, and apply to your work, or further expand in the students' work.
That's really interesting. I mean, it's interesting to bring these things into the context of teaching and these sort of parallels, maybe as alternative approaches. And Geraldine mentioned this kind of notion of professional practice or professionalism as being one of a number of things that work against that kind of risk-taking. Would you like to say anything about that, Geraldine?
Yeah, I suppose I can add to what's just been said, in that this is one of the constraints maybe of the curriculum of the society that then we have to sort of build into the curriculum. And I think in terms of, I think a lot of these things, and maybe using a experimental strategies despite those constraints. Maybe comes down to, yeah, really acknowledging like that part of being successful, if you want to use that word, professional, is having to adapt and take risks. That's what creatives have to do. So it's like, if you justify it in those kinds of terms, then it sort of makes sense. Certainly with I can't think of an example off the top of my head, but this is kind of the world that we live in, and you have to be able to really speak that language, I think. So it's not necessarily that professionalism prohibits us from having a lot of fun, but it's making it relevant in that sort of context as well.
Yeah, that's absolutely brilliant way of articulating it. There's almost two things going on at the same time, isn't there? You're having a conversation with the institution around professional practice, but then really thinking about what that might mean and how to encourage and foster that in a creative way.
Also, start really quickly as well, in relation to what you, Tavia, just spoke about in terms of, I think, like thinking ecologically, and that's increasingly an aspect of business and surviving on being entrepreneurial as well. It's about, sustainability and those kinds of things. So I think that's really exciting.
Yeah. Excellent. I've got another question here, which takes us in a slightly into a slightly different direction. But I'm going to maybe direct this one towards Magnus actually. But Nina has written some time ago. I wrote a piece for Leeds College of Art and Design where I did my own foundation, which including this sentence: "Foundation is the new MFA." A suggestion that stages of art education are temporally afterwards, but not beyond or better in terms of pedagogy. Finding myself now teaching fine art PhD by practice, I'm interested in what foundation could form the basis of fine art PhD by practice. And I think, I'm directing that one a little bit towards you, Magnus, because you've taught at all these different levels. And I wonder if the strategies that you describe, this transformation, can work at different levels.
Certainly in terms of learning theory, yes, what I think would be the answer to that if you were talking to Nudilaris or Taylor or Mezarov or whoever these other kind of key figures from transformative learning theory. And most of it emerged from adult education, actually, and from people at later stages in their lives. So I think the idea, can it be transformative? Can later stages of education be transformative? Absolutely. Is a doctoral education transformative? I don't really know is the answer, because I think there's a difference in my experience of both having studied at PhD level in practice-based PhD in the arts and having taught them as well, and also foundation the same. And it's really, I suppose, that foundation is a collective experience. It's a journey that you're really conscious that whether you're on a foundation with kind of 15 people or 20 people or 200 people, that you're on this journey together somehow. And I think the PhD is kind of maybe the ultimate educational point of that idea of individuation. You are kind of, your interests have fragmented into these kind of smaller and smaller kind of nuanced particles, and your mission then, rather than to become something, is to make a contribution to knowledge, certainly in the UK educational system. And once upon a time, that was a significant contribution to knowledge. And to do so, you've got to prove it's very, very different. In terms of what could be learned from, I really like the idea that even though one stage comes after the other, that in Nina's question, I like the idea that doesn't mean that one is better than the other. And I think many of us probably kind of really have a fondness for our time on foundation and remember it as one of the best moments of our education. And that's why I think it's kind of easier to think of it as transformative than the other stages of an education, because it's such a radical shift in our experience. whether or not that means that a PhD can learn something from, or the way PhDs are taught can learn something from that, I would need some more time to have a really good think about that one, I think, is the answer. What could be learned and how it could be learned. I have more general queries and questions about PhDs and the researchification of fine art practice and what that means as well, but maybe that's for another time.
Maybe, but it's an interesting and really direct, really thoughtful response, actually. Yeah, I think actually I think I can ask one. It sort of relates to that in terms of coming back to the degrees. I know that Geraldine's working within an integrated foundation year, and I've got quite a practical question, which is that sort of diagnostic experience that's been spoken about across a number of presentations today. In our institution, when you do an integrated foundation year, that's kind of you join a particular pathway, and that's not necessarily something that does go on in integrated foundation years. Is that something that you've been able to integrate and to maintain within the integrated foundations that you're on, Geraldine?
Yeah, so I mean, at Westminster, I can't speak for all of them, but they do join a specific BA. So they're joining BA photography, for example, with foundation year. So that student comes to us with, I'm going to do photography. I mean, some of them at interview, they kind of have a little bit of uncertainty, and they say, well, they're really using the foundation to confirm. And them being accepted onto foundation is kind of on the condition that they can switch between those 6 host course disciplines if they pass foundation. But I think there's something about being accepted into that single discipline. They do very much still, well, a lot of them do stay open to other disciplines, but there is a limitation onto how much you can really open up and promote risk-taking and exploration of all creative art and design disciplines when they're coming in with that kind of mindset of they know what they're doing next. So I think that's, it's an issue, or maybe it's a pro of foundation courses that aren't, don't have an immediate direct progression.
That's interesting. I've certainly seen that. I'm not involved, but it's and going back to Fatima's talk about the way that these kind of diagnostic or cross-disciplinary approaches are addressed within programs. It's not just a challenge for IFYs, but it's also for degrees often, which we're taking students directly nowadays as well. So,
So at BAF, we're also an IFAD, and I think one of the really interesting things that we've seen through applicants this year is because of the pandemic, they have less of a clue of what they want to do. And because they haven't had as much time in the studios, with their teachers, it's been more virtual. They're not sure about their hands-on skills or where they've kind of got with it. So those students that are coming from A-levels, I think even within those 4-year programs, we kind of need to allow them those spaces. I think that's what I'm expecting next year when we rock up in September, that student will have more uncertainty, which is kind of just another one of those post-pandemic things, I guess. But anyway,
it's maybe exacerbated something that was already there in that sense, hasn't it? I was going to, maybe it's in relation to that. You've taught at A-level and then BA, and that foundation being somewhere in the middle. Has that been a use? What did you take from the previous experiences?
That maybe A-level is more like PhD in its individualism and kind of like structure, and that BA is kind of somewhere in that middle point. And it feels like actually that, the things, the risk and all of that, the ownership and the kind of taking it out of your comfort zone is most kind of naturally aligned to that foundation year, whether that is as a 4-year program or as a kind of standalone foundation. What else should I say?
It's okay. That's I'm sure many of us will have taught across different levels or engage in conversations across different levels. And I think, yeah, it's a useful position to be in. I mean, we've all studied at different levels as well, but when you come to teach on one, you draw on that quite a lot, I guess. But yeah, Yutavia mentioned, I mean, it focused quite a lot on that kind of nurturing and support for students. Has that been something that you've found easy to maintain this year, Yutavia? Has it been something?
Yeah, I didn't have a problem with the whole nurturing and support, but also I noticed that they would nurture each other, which was very cool to watch that dynamic happen. They would call each other, they would have more conversations because they were separate. You know, they weren't in studio, so there was more like use of technology, of course, but there was more conversation because it was almost, that was their way of trying to build a virtual studio in a way, you know. So yeah, it was cool.
Well, glad they responded so well. You know, I know there's been lots of challenges at different courses, and I'm sure it'll be down to a lot of work and specific work in your context. So, okay, well, I'm not sure I've got any further questions in here. Elspeth makes a point that the management of our institutions is our problem. And yeah, it's controversial, and probably I could provoke a whole series of other questions with that one. But thanks very much for the contributions, and there's been a bit of thanks in that regards as well. I'm going to pass over to Sean now, who's going to draw things together and talk about plans for Infi.
Yeah, what an amazing 3 hours we've just had. That was way exceeded my expectations, so that was really, really fantastic. Some great questions as well at the end. I'd like to thank all the speakers for their presentations, which were, as I've just said, were really stimulating, really fantastic. But also I'd like to thank Joe and Joan and Chloe for the sort of organisational side of that. And I'd particularly like to thank Alia Banis at British High School of Art and Design for all the organisation that she's done behind the scenes to put this together as a sort of webinar and to make this happen. So thanks, Alia. It's great to be reminded by Nina that foundation is the new MFA. I'd forgotten that you'd written that, Nina, so that was a great point to finish on, that foundation is the new MFA. So Infi is now officially up and running. We intend to do more events like this one in the future, both online and hopefully in the not too distant future, offline as well, where with a bit of luck we can meet each other and we can all go somewhere for a couple of days and have presentations and discussion around the nature of foundation. We are developing a website which we hope to launch soon. Primarily, Infi exists to put people who teach on foundation courses throughout the world, or who have an interest in foundation education, to put them in touch with each other. So we're very, very keen to hear your ideas about what you might want from a professional association for foundation educators. And our intention is to arrange a forum on Zoom in the new academic year, quite early in the new academic year, where we can discuss the future possibilities of building upon today's event and other activities that you think Invi should be addressing. Please send us your contact details, because we're very keen to build a mailing list up. There will be a recording of this event that hopefully in the next week or so we will put online, and we can send that out to anybody who's interested and sends us their contact details. And I know people have been telling us that there are colleagues of theirs who would like to have attended and have missed it for one reason or another. So this will be available as a recording. You can email us on inficontact@gmail.com, and I'm hoping that Chloe's got a slide of that she's going to put up now, so that we can sort of finish on on that slide. Is that
I've got the slide.
You've got the slide.
Yeah.
Okay, so again, just to thank everybody who's attended in the audience, who's come today, all the speakers, and Chloe, Joe and Joan who've chaired the different strands. Thanks everybody for an amazing event.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone, it's been great. See you all again.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
That was wonderful. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
See you all.
Please do pass on your details and keep in touch as we move forward as well for all attending.
Thank you.
I think that's the quickest 3 hours in my entire life.
Oh, great,
That went so fast.
Thank you all. That was really great.
Thank you,
Bye.
Natalie.
Brilliant.
Bye. Nice
Really
to meet
well
you. And Fatima, finally, after these years.